Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome, everyone, and thank you very much for joining me for my monthly office hours again. I see a couple of people who are already connected, so it's awesome. Glad you're here. If you wouldn't mind dropping a message in the chat, let me know that you can both see the video, you can see me with my slides, and you can also hear me. Just make sure that I've got, that everyone can actually see and hear me. It gives me enough of a kind of a validation here that everything is working. I'm looking forward to talking to everybody today, sharing with you some of the updates we have in the Microsoft 365 development world. There's a lot of stuff that has happened in the last week following the Microsoft Build conference. I have a few things that I'm happy to talk about and run through on some updates related to Microsoft 365 development. Specifically, we'll talk a little bit about SharePoint Framework, and then I'll dive into some of the updates from Build as it relates to those of us in the SharePoint Framework, in the Microsoft 365 world. There's stuff that was impacting Microsoft Teams development and Copilot development, and so if you're building declarative agents, or if you're building custom engine agents, I've got a ton of stuff to share with you. Another thing too, just as a little bit of a heads up here, some of you have noticed, and you've let me know, and I really appreciate it, that in the last few of these office hours that I've done, you've left a couple comments below the video to tell me that you could hear a cricket, like an electronic kind of cricket sound in the background of these videos. My last few office hours, really in my YouTube videos for maybe the last 2-ish months, maybe a little bit longer than that. That should not be there anymore. The challenge I was facing is really hard for me to hear this stuff because I suffer from that condition, tinnitus or whatever, however you say it, but I think it's tinnitus. But it's like a constant ringing in your ears. And so I couldn't hear it. And it wasn't until, so some of you did, I reached out, when some of you reached out, left a message in the comments. I was like, are you sure? Can you make sure of it? And then finally, when I realized, okay, there's something there, I couldn't hear it. And so I was trying to figure out a way, how can I actually make it so that I can hear this and I know what they're talking about so that I can fix it? It took actually a lot of time. Actually was getting my family involved to try to get my daughter involved, my wife involved, and saying, can you guys hear this? And it was, the common theme was they could hear it with headphones, but it actually had nothing to do with headphones. It was just, you could hear it better when you had your headphones on. And I mean, I had this thing cranked up all the way to, as volume as loud as it would go to try and hear it. But I was able to visualize what was going on, found the problem. It was clearly machine-made problem. So it was not a producing problem or a streaming problem or something like that. I could tell that it was something locally on my machine, and was able to isolate kind of what I thought it was, changed one or two things, and now it's no longer there. So at least I don't think it's there anymore. I would really appreciate it if you would drop a comment below and let me know, both if you're here live, leave a comment in the live stream. It looks like one person is saying, they're saying it's all good, it's all healed. So that's awesome. I don't know who this is. Amy on the net. Amy on the net. So I'm not sure who you are, but thank you very much. But if you're listening to the recording from the live stream, also, would you mind dropping a comment in there? Specifically, if you heard it before. So Anthony, I'm looking at you, and anybody else, I'd appreciate if you'd let me know. So that would be a huge help to me. So it sounds like, it's going okay right now. All right. If you're interested, it was a little bit of two things. One, it was a little bit of interference with my microphone cable. And then also, I just think my microphone cable finally just failed. I had this thing for, I had that cable for maybe probably pushing 10 years. It's an XLR microphone. So it's the big, put that in front of my face here. So it's the big kind of the barrel kind of a plug and everything to it. And I think the cable just failed. So I just kind of rerouted the cable and got a different cable that I plugged into it, and everything seems to be working fine. So that's all good. You didn't tune in though for this. You tuned in for the office hours. So let's dive in. Let me kind of explain what this is. Before I get started, Who am I? For those of you who are new that are joining us, my name is Andrew Connell. I'm going to do this really quick. My name is Andrew Connell. I've about 20 plus years, 22 plus years in the, we'll call it the Microsoft 365 development space, but I predate Microsoft 365. Awesome. Thanks, Anthony. Oh, there was actually two Anthonys. So Anthony, thank you very much for Anthony P letting me know. There's another Anthony H, I think H, that was letting me know. So thanks a lot. So I've been doing, Microsoft 365 development going all the way back before it was even Office 365, primarily in the SharePoint world for server-side dev. Spend a lot of time in the SharePoint Framework space, Microsoft Teams development space. A lot of stuff changed last week at Build. The SharePoint embedded space, and also Microsoft 365 Copilot, and also doing a lot of stuff with Microsoft Azure. I'm really active, mostly active on the socials and on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and as you can see here on YouTube. And then I'm also an MVP. I've been an MVP for a couple different categories, but really for anything SharePoint, or going back, if anybody remembers this, content management server, or Microsoft 365 development going back 20 plus years. And I have a company called Voitanos, where my mission is to make you an expert at the Microsoft 365 development ecosystem and be irreplaceable to your clients and your organization. So that's who I am. Now, I like to do these office hours once a month, these public office hours once a month. Usually they're on the third Tuesday at 11 a.m. Eastern time. So that's like New York City time. I usually like to do these on the third Tuesday of the month. Unfortunately, this month I had to push that back by 1 week due to a scheduling conflict. Usually, what we do, it's an old slide. I meant to move that last one there. That was from our previous month. I like to go through the main areas of Microsoft 365 development, which is usually SharePoint Framework, Microsoft Teams apps, and Microsoft 365 Copilot, and cover like what's new. However, and I have lots of little things, like specifically around Teams. I've got 1 or 2 bugs or issues that have cropped up that I'm aware of, that I'm tracking. I wanted to give an update with you guys. However, I really think today you might be more interested in what happened with Build, because Microsoft's Build conference was last week, and they announced a ton of stuff, like a ton. And I'll get to that in just a bit. So I'll do a really quick SharePoint Framework update, and then I would just transition right into Build. If you guys have any questions, I didn't receive any questions ahead of time. So if you have any questions as part of the, during my office hours, post them in the chat. I will make sure that we cover all of your questions. I'm going to go through a quick little updates, and I'll give you with the SharePoint Framework, and then I'll talk a little bit about Build. And as you have questions, if they're relevant, what we're talking about right then, I'll happy to go through and just answer your questions there. All right, sound good? I can see everybody nodding their heads. Not really, but I'm just going to imagine that's what's going on. Okay, so first off is let's talk about the SharePoint Framework. So the State of the Union on the SharePoint Framework. Now Microsoft has had 2 releases since we last got together. They released the SharePoint Framework version 1.21.0, and then very quickly realized they had an issue, and they had to issue a patch for .1. I'll be honest, there's really nothing here. There are 2 significant updates that are mostly infrastructure related, but there is really nothing in the 1.21 release for us in terms of features or bug fixes or things that you can address. They say that they added support for flexible layouts, but I'll be completely honest, this has absolutely nothing to do with any version of the SharePoint Framework. The only thing you have to do with flexible layouts is to take advantage of flexible layouts in a web part. So that is where I can have a web part that maybe expands to different sections and different sizes and stuff on my on a page. The only thing you have to do to take advantage of that or support different layouts is to make a change inside of your web parts manifest file, which is right next to the TypeScript file. That manifest file, it conforms to a specific schema, and that schema is not versioned. So if you open up even an SPFx 1.10 web part, you will have access to flexible layouts. All you end up doing is you just make one little change in your manifest to specify, have a little bit more control over how your web part is going to get rendered when it's in a flexible layout scenario. So there was nothing there that was really interesting. Kind of exposes the fact that they don't version their manifest, which is a little disappointing, but it is what it is. The other two things that they did that are actually a pretty big deal are they bumped the version, let's change that. They changed the version of Node that they support. So they support Node.js version 22 in the latest version of the SharePoint framework. Now, the reason why I say they didn't, I started to say they bumped it, and I said, no, let's not say that, because they didn't just upgrade it. The only version of Node that the current version of the SharePoint framework supports is Node version 22, one of the LTS 22 versions. So you have to switch to just that version. They did that. That was primarily the reason why they pushed out this release of the SharePoint framework, because the previous version that they supported, Node version 18, had reached end of life and was no longer being supported by the Node organization. I think that happened at the end of April, or it happened at some point in May. But regardless, they had to go through and make that change to support version 22. They also bumped the version of TypeScript. I believe before it was version 4.7 something, I think 4.7.4. They bumped that up to TypeScript version 5.3. I like that a lot, because what that does is it allows me to upgrade some of the tooling dependencies that we use in an automated testing scenario. If you do anything with automated testing when it comes to the SharePoint framework, you know that we use one of the best tools to use is a tool called Jest, J-E-S-T. And what it only understands JavaScript. It doesn't understand TypeScript. So you need to get a preprocessor to process the TypeScript files as JavaScript files before they get to Jest. The challenge with that is that the preprocessor that we use, called TS Jest, it only works with specific versions of Jest. So I have to find out the version of Jest that I can use. I have to find the version of TS Jest that supports the version of the SharePoint framework, supports the version of TypeScript that the version of SharePoint framework I'm using supports. So if I was using SPFx 1.20, that only supported TypeScript 4.7.4, which meant I had to find the TS Node preprocessor, what version of that supported TypeScript 4.7.4, and then that would dictate what version of Jest I could use. By them jumping from the major version 4 to the major version 5, specifically 5.3, that lets me upgrade the entire tree. So for those of you who are students of my ultimate bundle of my SharePoint framework course, you will see the sample get updated in that chapter. You'll see that get updated for 5.3 shortly. I'm also going to make another big update to that chapter as well, coming soon. So stay tuned for that. That's everything I got for the SharePoint framework. There is one more thing that's going to affect everybody, not right away, but it's coming soon. It's rolling out right now. It's going to be rolling out through the end of June. And I'll be able to talk more about it later, I think on my next office hours, but keep an eye on my blog at voitanos.io and in my articles, or make sure you're subscribed to my newsletter, voitanos.io/newsletter, because I will make sure that you'll see an article that I'm going to publish soon about this. What SharePoint Online is doing is they are rolling out support for something called Content Security Policy, CSP. Now they call it something different, of course, because they just want to give a name to something, everything. CSP is a way for you to configure your SharePoint environment, or really any web environment, but I'll just talk about SharePoint Online for example. It is a way for you to configure your SharePoint Online tenant to say what domains are supported for loading scripts in. So for example, if I have a web part and that web part is going to load a JavaScript library from a CDN or from some location that I'm not familiar with, that I don't care about, if that location has not been whitelisted by a tenant administrator, then it will not load that. The browser will not load that script, which means your web part's going to break. This is rolling out right now. However, It is not being enforced. It is simply being reported. So I'll have an article out that explains how this works, and we'll talk more about it in my next office hours, unless you have a question about it today. But what this does is that you have to then go in, sorry, what it does today is that if you, once it's hit your tenant and it's rolled out and the reporting is the only thing that's gonna be turned on, it's not gonna throw any errors on you. Stuff will still work as is now. But if you're loading a script that is not from an unsupported domain or a non-whitelisted domain, SharePoint Online, they call those trusted script sources. I don't know why they did that. Why don't we just call it CSP configuration? Because that's what it is across the entire internet. Whatever. They didn't ask me what to call it. Actually, they did. I told them, and but they already picked another name. But what you end up having to do then is it's just going to log a message both in the console of the browser, but it will also log a like a finding inside the what's it called? Microsoft Purview. So you'll see it in the audit logs. And I can show you all this kind of stuff. If somebody has a question later, actually, I can show you an article that I did for Microsoft on this that got published recently. I believe it's published. I have to go back and double check. But yeah, so that's going to be that's going to be nice, because I see somebody had a comment here. It's like they're bringing on capabilities to support hardening the platform. They are. This is a good thing. Frankly, this is long overdue. The challenge, though, that we have with this, or that I have with this, is I have a lot of. It feels like a half-baked feature today. There is a way that if you have a component that's going to include these remote scripts that are being loaded from external endpoints, there is a way that they'll get automatically added to this trusted script sources. But quite frankly, they've barely scratched the surface of what they could have done for us. So there is no way for us as a developer to communicate to a consumer today. Okay, let me just say it like this. There's a very minimal way that we can tell a customer that when they install our solution to a app catalog, and the little pop-up shows up and it says click this to deploy it, the same place where it says you need to go to the API admin page to go through and grant permissions that this thing needs. There is a place where it will list out the domain or domains that are listed, that need to be listed as trusted script sources, and they will add that for you. However, that is only going to happen under one specific scenario that very few people are doing. Most of the developers, most of us that are going through and referencing scripts from outside, there is no way for us to put in the package a way to get a domain listed on that deployment pop-up, which is annoying. It's feedback that I've given them when I first saw this, because there's a lot of ways you can do this stuff. So I see Brian's got a question here. It says, is that just using the externals? Like if I inject the script into the script tag, this new stuff cannot pick that up. Not even that. So first of all, so a couple things you just said here. So first of all, CSP is going to be enforced on any script, anything. It doesn't matter how you're loading them inside of the browser. CSP is a web server / browser technology that the browser is going, what it does is the server adds some information to the source of the page as part of the headers, telling the browser that what scripts are safe to load on this site. So it's a way for, say, SharePoint Online to say, I do not want scripts coming from jimbobscdn.com to be loaded on this site. Regardless if someone goes through and adds a web part that actually does that, the browser will not respect that request and will just not even go through and load that file. It does not matter. And that's just how the web technology works with CSP. What you then would have to do is you would have to go in and configure the CSP policy to say that domain is okay, and then it can be used. When it comes to the context of the SharePoint framework, no matter how you load a script from outside of SharePoint Online, so all scripts inside SharePoint Online, they're automatically going to be safe. But if you load a script from anywhere outside of SharePoint Online, they are going to be subject to the CSP policy. So if you have a script that you're loading from the config files externals property, if you have a script file that you are loading from maybe like doing like Webpack magic comments, something I've talked about in the past with like the automatic chunking. If you are loading a script using the the SharePoint component loader, the load script method, all of those things are going to fall into this category as well. The only way that your script is going to get automatically flagged as something that would be added to your to the trusted script sources, you are going to get a the only way to do that is if you go in and configure your project to not have the scripts included in your package, and instead you say you want to host them in a separate CDN. And it basically what it's doing is it's looking at the property in the right manifest.json file in the config folder. That is really only a solution that ISVs do. I don't see anybody else do that. So if you're getting it any other way, it doesn't apply. It's not going to apply. Okay. So I'll come back to you in just a second, Anthony. Brian, I see you said, so if a script loads an analytics solution, you have to register the analytics solutions domain as safe. That's correct. So if you're using App Insights, got to list out the CDN from that. If you're using Fathom or Ahrefs or Microsoft Clarity or Google Analytics, you're going to have to list that as safe. And this is one of those things that you're not going to be able to tell SharePoint Online that it is a safe domain to where the administrator of whoever your customer is, when they go to install your package, they're not going to see this like thing show up as one of the options. You're going to have to be the one to like communicate that to them and say, here's an extra step you got to do after you deploy this, because otherwise it won't work. And the only way they're going to know it's not working is that your stuff isn't working. And then they can look at the console and they'll see an error that gets listed out, or they can go to Purview and look at the audit log and see it. Now, again, just to be clear, when this rolls out into your tenant, it is not going to enforce the CSP policy, but if it finds a script that would be subject to it and get blocked, it will log those as findings in both the audit log for Purview and in the console. So you'll at least be able to see like what's going to get hit and how you can get ready for it. Anthony said, how is this different than the HTML field security setting per site that the embedded web part uses? This just tenant-wide setting to bypass that. This is a tenant-wide. So yes, this is a tenant-wide setting, number one. And number two, this has nothing to do with SharePoint. This is strictly just a browser technology security feature that's a standard, an internet standard. This is the way that it should be done. What I am a little disappointed with them in is that, unlike how I can have in the package solution.json file that's inside the config folder, where I can list out all of the permission requests that this component's going to need, I want to have a way to list out the domains that I need to be whitelisted as well as trusted script sources, so that they either get added automatically when they deploy it, or at least they're listed out and there's a way for the administrator to then go in and know like, oh, I've got to go over here and go add these. Or maybe there's a request that they haven't been added yet, like the permissions get, where it's more of a request and you have to approve the permission grant, right? So that's how this works. It sounds like this is news to some people. This was in a message center item. I did see it in the message center this week. I did not mention it in my newsletter this week because frankly, I was afraid it was going to get lost in the build stuff, but I will have an article out about this soon. If you want to know more about it, let me know and I'm happy to talk more about it. Okay, let's jump to our next slide here. Interesting. Note that that's news to a lot of people. All right, so let's talk about build. I'm curious, how many of you were paying attention to the build conference last week? Put like just a 1 in the chat to let me know if you were paying attention to it. And what was your favorite thing you saw? I'll put that in the chat too, just kind of see what people are saying there. I'm just curious. I want to run through some high level things here, but I can talk a lot more about this if you're interested, because today, let me switch over and show you something. Today, I published, actually it just went out in the last 20 minutes or so. I just published a newsletter today with my opinionated good and bad stuff. Just came out in my newsletter today, was very opinionated because there's good stuff and then there's some stuff that's really, well, is really frustrating to me that I'm happy to talk about if you're interested. But I published the article out today. This thing is not short. This is close to a 30-minute read. It's a lot of stuff. I really, there's a lot of stuff here. Okay. So you see, I broke it down, all these different categories, and I really focused just on the developer side. I did put a little thing in there about Copilot Studio and added a bunch of links to videos, but there was a lot. I just want to, just to give you a little bit of a teaser though. If you go to like one of these sections, I give you a bit of a recap on what the news was about. And then at the end of that section, you will see where I reference either like an announcement article. I may reference any documentation links that are associated with the announcement. And then I'll reference also all of the YouTube videos that are the recordings from the sessions at the conference. So I've got like 55 different videos, that different sessions that I was tracking that are directly or tangentially related to Microsoft 365 development. So some stuff around Azure AI Search and functions and AI Foundry, a lot of stuff around Copilot Studio, and then some other things here that I'm happy to dive into. Some of these are really long. Like if you look at, I think Search had a bunch. That is AI Foundry. So clearly a lot of sessions here on AI Foundry. All of these sessions too, you can do what I do. So one of the things I did is I also, if you come to the very beginning of this, I have a YouTube channel. Sorry, I have a YouTube channel, but I have a playlist that I created on my YouTube channel that is just the sessions that I was tracking. So it's 54 sessions. It includes 3 keynotes, breakout sessions, on-demand videos that were recorded before the conference, and all the live sessions and a lot of the demos that were done at the conference as well. There's obviously a lot more stuff. There were actually 684 sessions at Build. A lot of them though were not recorded. They were like labs and stuff that were not really part of that stuff. But of all like the presentation sessions, got everything inside this one thing. So I like doing this playlist because then I can say like, hey, go as a YouTube premium subscriber, I can have it all downloaded to my iPad or on my phone and listen to the feed of it at like 2x speed or something. Some speakers are not great at 2x. Like I'm not good at 2x, but some are great at like 1.5x. Okay, so let me talk a little bit about what I think are some of the big things here. All right, and I'm happy to go into a little bit more detail about like, oh my God, this is terrible. So let me give you the big high level thing. And then if you got any questions, cool, but I'm happy to also go off on a riff and just kind of, here's stuff that I love, here's stuff that I hate, here's stuff that makes no sense to me. So first of all, they released, so back at Ignite 2024, back last November, Microsoft introduced or announced something that was coming called the Microsoft 365 Agents SDK. Now, there was very little information about this at the time. And thankfully at Build, we learned a lot more. In fact, it went generally available at Build. So what is this? If you build apps for Microsoft Teams or specifically bots or message extensions, you are using something called the Bot Framework v4. What the Microsoft 365 Agents SDK is, all an agent is, it's just a chat bot. So it's still just a bot. It's just that we use the term agents because welcome to the industry, welcome to the world. They have an AI flavor to them. You generally are going to use, it's a good idea to use a large language model and AI with your bots because it makes it easier to deduce user intent from the natural language processing that that LLMs are really good at. And this is going to give you a better experience both as a developer to express what you want the conversation to be, and then or how you want to respond to the conversation. And then second of all, it's going to be a better experience for your end users to express what they want to do with the bot or with the agent. So they released this Agents SDK. What it does, you can think of it as kind of the V5 of the bot framework. So it's going to replace all of the stuff that we did with the bot framework. Now, there are I've got like, hey, this is great. And I like what they did. And I generally like the flavor of how they've rebuilt stuff. The hosting engine is better. The way that they've organized the different namespaces and packages, I like that. However, even though it's GA, sure felt like to me like this came in really hot off the presses, and they came in to Build really hot because there are 3 SDKs and only one of them has documentation. the C# and .NET version. The JavaScript and the Python version do not have any docs associated with them. The samples are very, very light. There's not much there. And in my investigation and kind of digging into this, there's some things that I'm like, this looks like somebody copied stuff from the bot framework v4, and then somebody also created new stuff. And I'm kind of like, well, which one am I supposed to use here? I can use the old stuff using the new packages, or I should use the new stuff. And it's a little fight. So for example, if you do message extensions, let's say you do a search-based message extension, you're going to get an activity sent from Teams down to your web service that uses the activity type message called compose extensions / query. The way we did this in the bot framework was that you could either look at the raw message and figure out, oh, that's what I'm looking for, and then respond to it. Or you could implement you could create a class that inherited from the Teams activity handler class, which would then, you would then override a specific method. I think it's handle message extensions query. It's actually longer than that. I forget what it is, but you just implement one method and and then you would respond back with with your response, and it would work. That's still there, but there's another way to do it that's a little bit easier, I think, with the way that they did the SDK. But I'm like, why are there two things here? And then, of course, when you go, and I'm going to talk about this in a minute, but when you go into the templates all got refreshed in the Teams project, in the Teams tooling for VS Code, and the templates don't use the new stuff. So I'm like, this doesn't look good, right? Like, shouldn't you be using the new stuff? So to me, this Agents SDK, it kind of feels a little bit between beta and release candidate, but they say it's done. They say it's GA, but they sure don't show it. Another really big update. Oh my gosh, this one really gets under my skin. This one is about the tooling that we use. So before, if you created a Teams app in VS Code, you were using something called the Teams Toolkit for Visual Studio Code. It's a Teams Toolkit extension for Visual Studio Code. And the name of it wasn't, the name of it has changed once over time. First it was SPFx, and then it was the Teams Toolkit. It's been getting more and more features over time to where it's not just about building Teams apps. So I would use the Teams Toolkit to create a tab for Teams, a message extension, a bot, but I could also use it to create Office add-ins. That got added about a year or so ago. So like add-ins for Word or Excel or PowerPoint or Outlook. And then last year, we used it to also start creating agents for Microsoft 365 Copilot. And those would be either custom engine agents, which is like a bot that uses the Teams AI library, something I'll talk about in a minute again. That one is really getting under my skin. And then the other one was a declarative agent. So you could say, well, I mean, I'm creating agents with a Teams toolkit. That doesn't make sense. Well, when you create an agent, you're really creating a bot for Teams, and you're either doing it declaratively or with code. So you're still creating a Teams app and deploying it into your Teams environment, because that's where Copilot is. That's where Microsoft 365 Copilot is, even if you're using office.com/chat for Copilot. Well, in their infinite wisdom, the Microsoft 365 development group decided to rename this. Fine, great opportunity for a good name, right? They chose the name the Microsoft 365 Agents Toolkit, which you can shorten it up to just call it the ATK. So Teams Toolkit was the TTK. This is the ATK. But what's weird, and it completely replaces the existing toolkit. In fact, if you have not opened up VS Code since last Monday, if you open it up and you had the Teams Toolkit installed, you will see there's an update, and it will install the Agents Toolkit, the ATK, which will replace your Teams Toolkit, which means you get new project templates, which is a little eye-opening to some of my students in a Teams development class I'm teaching right now. And it was eye-opening to me too. I expected the name to change. I anticipated that. I knew that was coming. I didn't expect the templates to change like that. So it also is going to replace the CLI. So we used to have a CLI for doing Teams app development called Teams App. And it was at Microsoft /Teams app -CLI, or sorry, Teams Toolkit -CLI. But at the command line, you would run Teams App. Well, we get a new one, and it's called the Microsoft 365 Agents Toolkit CLI. And when you install that, It will replace the existing one, or you need to uninstall the old one, the Teams app one. You install this one. This is the new one. And when you run it at the command line, you just type in ATK. So for Agents Toolkit. There's some also some changes they made to the project templates. This part, again, is where I feel like the Agents SDK and the toolkit are a little rushed, because there are parts of the toolkit that are using the Agents SDK for like bots and message extensions, and there are other parts that seem to be using still the bot framework. For example, the message extension sample is still using the old way of doing it. So that's a little awkward to me. I was a little disappointed because, to me, if you're a brand new developer coming into this and you say, I want to build an agent, well, you're going to look for the Agents Toolkit, naturally. But if you're a brand new developer and you're like, I want to build Office add-ins, what do I use? The answer is the Agents Toolkit, because you use the Agents Toolkit to create agents and tabs for Teams and bots for Teams and message extensions for Teams and dialogues and meeting apps. And you also use it to create Office add-ins for Word and Excel and Outlook. I don't know about you, but the word agent doesn't scream Office add-in. To me, big time ball dropped. In my opinion, I think this should have been called the Microsoft 365 Development Toolkit or Developers Toolkit, because it's all encompassing of everything we can do in 365. So I get that the Teams Toolkit was already extending its name a little bit, but those things were added to the toolkit after it was already created and we were moving forward. Now we had an opportunity to go with a brand new name, and they totally whiffed on the pitch. So really frustrating. I'd love it if you give them some feedback on that, because they are absolutely going to get that feedback from me. I thought it was just, frankly, I think it's a big, I think it's a transparent marketing ploy to try and put agents and AI into every single thing that we talk about with Microsoft these days. So disappointing in the long run, though. Doesn't really matter. Someone says, I want to build Office add-ins. You're going to say, go get the Agents Toolkit. Like, no, I don't want to do anything with AI. Like, that doesn't matter. You still have to use this. Well, what about using the old Teams Toolkit? Yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. The only way you can get it is using the Agents Toolkit. But like, no more buts. This is how it works. The other one that I'm not going to dwell on this one. I really could, but I'm not going to, because I want to cover more of my stuff. And Brian, I saw you had a question about you're most interested in semantic index being made available. I think so, by the way of Copilot APIs. Yes, so I'll get to that in a minute. So the Teams AI library, we used to use this, the V1 of this. We use this to create custom engine agents. So effectively what this is this made it easier for us to create bots that would take advantage of a large language model, an LLM, that was either from OpenAI or Azure OpenAI, to deduce user intent from the user's prompt and then map what the user wanted to do to actions that we created in our app, and also be able to add in like additional data and knowledge with each one of those prompts. That's what the V1 was. Well, I'm still trying to figure this out, okay? But everything I saw this get released before Build, and I was like, I'm gonna keep my mouth shut, and I'm gonna wait until you guys have a session at Build so that I can better understand what you're doing here and give you a chance to explain it before I start asking a lot more questions. Well, I can't find that session at Build. I feel a little sessions here and there from little demos and stuff here and there throughout Build, but nobody addresses this. Here's the thing. First of all, the AI library V2 is not just a library, it's an SDK, which means software development kit, which means it's more than a library. Second of all, it's in preview mode. So I'm kind of crossing my fingers that we can kind of influence this. And I hope that it's like early preview, and we're not going to go GA anytime soon, because they just went GA with V1 about a year ago, about a year and a half ago. Here's the thing that's frustrating about this to me. This clearly looks like that the group that is doing the Teams AI library has no relation to the group that's doing the toolkit, either the old TTK or the people that are doing the ATK. This is the same development group that did both of them, but let's just call it the toolkit. So the ATK. It looks like they have no relationship to them. In fact, they really have no relationship to them, and you can even tell because in their docs, they even have a message that says, The Teams AI v2 library team does not manage the Teams toolkit. It's managed by the it's managed by the toolkit team. Little confusing there. If you run into issues using the Teams toolkit, contact their team for support. Topics that fall under the Teams toolkit include using the extension, running apps, deployment processing, debugger. It's like, first of all, this sentence doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, but it sure looks to me like somebody's trying to be defensive, saying, we are not those people. Don't come to us. Like, all right, that's a little weird. Second of all, these guys did not just release an update to their library. As I said, they have an SDK. They have their own CLI, and their CLI is called the Teams CLI, and you run it with just the Teams command. But what about the toolkit? So if I'm supposed to be using something called Teams, that would mean that's how I manage my Teams apps. But now I've already got this thing called the toolkit, and I manage that, and my app's using a command line tool called the ATK. Okay, that doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Second of all, they have project templates with this. If I want to create a brand new project, I use their Teams CLI to create a brand new project. But here's what's weird about it. It has no relationship to the Teams toolkit, or to the Agents toolkit, or the Teams toolkit. Their documentation is even old. They're still calling it the Teams toolkit. These screenshots were taken yesterday, all right, or last night. So the renaming has already happened, and their docs are already incorrect. But they are saying like, hey, if you want to go through and make this work with the toolkit, run this command for our CLI, and you'll be able to leverage this project you created in the toolkit. Like, well, so you have your own project templates for this? What project templates do you have? They have templates for tabs and for message extensions and for bots. Like, what the hell? Why? I thought that was what the Teams toolkit did. That doesn't make sense. Why do we have two of these different things? Why don't we just have one solution for this instead of two to confuse developers? Better yet, the Teams AI library is supposed to be used to create custom engine agents. Guess what? Let's see if I can find this. Let's go to my thing where I cover this. Okay, this is a screenshot. This is a screenshot from the Agents toolkit. So you can see Agents toolkit right there. If I say I'm going to create a new agent or an app, and then if I go and choose the custom engine agent, it doesn't use the Teams AI library. Like, it only uses the M365 Agents SDK. It really looks like we have two groups at Microsoft fighting over who's going to do dev tools. This is ridiculous. This is such a bad message. It makes no sense at all to me. And I kind of run through this a little bit here. It makes absolutely no sense. But this one's just really frustrating to me. So yeah, it's pretty ridiculous here. But whatever, it is what it is. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about it, or if you think I'm just making a mountain out of a molehill here. So, all right, let's go on to our next. Let me go to my next slide here. This is my last content slide, so I'm happy to riff for as much as we got at the end and answer any questions you guys have. What other stuff do we have? So this is the good stuff that I was pretty happy with. There's also a lot of other good stuff. The stuff that came out of the Azure AI search team, really cool stuff. There's a session by a guy named Pablo Castro who runs that team. Absolutely fascinating. Really, really good. So I definitely recommend checking out his stuff, that session that I have linked in there. There's also some good stuff around Azure Functions and what they've done to help you create agents that are more like multi-agent orchestrators, multi-agent orchestration. So like one agent could then like fire off a prompt to other agents that they all go work in parallel. When they come back, their response comes back to the main agent who can then finish everything off. They've got one of like a travel agent kind of an option. So like one agent goes and books flights, one agent checks like availability, one agent does like hotels, and it all comes back to the travel agent who's working on my behalf. So it's a cool concept. All right, so let's talk here about some of the other updates they made around Microsoft 365 Copilot. Now, all of these are directly related to declarative agents. So if you sat through my workshop before, my virtual workshop or my workshop like at a conference around declarative agents, I've got a lot of work to do to update that thing. I knew that there were going to be some updates when I delivered my workshop. I think it was 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago in Las Vegas at the M365 Community Conference. I did not expect that we were going to have this much. So one thing is that we have a concept called Microsoft Graph Connectors, but they used to be called Microsoft Graph Connectors. These things are now called, These things are now called Graph Connectors. This is where you can put unstructured content. So if you've got like transcripts from videos that are not inside Microsoft 365, or you've got content like in Azure storage blobs or AWS S3 buckets, you can inject all that stuff in, right? And what that does is that would allow you inject it in as a connector using the Microsoft Graph, which will then trigger M365 to index that content. And it will do it as a vector-based index. So it creates like embeddings, and it will store that in their vector database that they use for M365, which is called semantic index. And that's what Copilot uses to ground your responses to your prompts in Microsoft 365 Copilot. A really big update that they had here. So first of all, they just did a name change. No big deal. Another big change they did, though, is that before we were limited in the number of connectors we could create per tenant. And then we were limited in the number of items per connector and the number of items across all connectors in our tenant. I'm still trying to find the documentation for this, but at a session at Build, they said all limits are gone, right? And they literally showed a slide. Let me find my slide. This is the slide they showed. So no more item limits. They said there are no more limits, connectors, and item limits. Now, I don't know if it means, if the way that the guy said it was a little quick, and I don't know if it was, if he meant like also there's no limit on connectors. I'm trying to double check on that, but there are no limits with items now. So that's huge. The no items with connectors, let's double check on that. But that's what I believe right now, is that there's no limits on the number of connectors, all right? The other thing that they did here is they added a new project template. Where's my mouse? They added a new project template to the Agents Toolkit that allows you to create a Copilot connector. Before it was our responsibility to write all the code for that. So this is done by using the Microsoft Graph to do basically three things: create a connector, register a schema for the connector, and then ingest content. So three different pieces. I covered that in my workshop, but those are three things you end up having to do. There's now a project template that kind of walks through setting this up for you, all right, to make it a little bit easier. Another big update, this is one I was really looking forward to learning about because I had not heard about this beforehand. It just felt like it was just like the silence was deafening kind of a thing. For declarative agent, they are adding support for the Model Context Protocol servers, MCP servers. And they're doing so as a action runtime option. So if you've done anything with declarative agents, today you can use what are called API plugins, which the longer name is Open API plugins. So that is a endpoint that supports or has an Open API descriptor document, an OAD file, which is a big YAML file that essentially tells something else, here's how you can call this, here's the shape of the data that we expect, here's the shape of the data you're going to get back, here's the type of responses. If you've heard of Swagger, Swagger is the predecessor to OAD, to the Open API descriptor documents. What a MCP does, and then when we added these actions to our declarative agent, we would register an action and then map that action to a function in a runtime. And the only runtime we supported before last week, well, actually, and still today, is the Open API descriptors. What they're adding is the ability to have that function now map to a action on an MCP server. That right now is in private preview. That is not available for us today. There is a screenshot in my wrap-up article that does walk through it. In fact, let me grab the link to that wrap-up article so you guys can, and drop that in the chat so you can go take a look at it. Let's grab that and let me just put this in the chat. There we go. So that's coming. So that's something that's coming. Basically, it turns declarative agents into a MCP client, which is a big deal. If you're not familiar with what an MCP is and why this is a big deal, post something in the chat. I'm happy to explain that. This technology, MCPs, I haven't seen something in tech or the internet world like take the world by fire as fast as this has. This has like exploded in the last 2 months. I came back from a 1-week vacation and went straight to an event with a bunch of peers and started seeing all this MCP stuff. And I'm like, how long has this been around? They're like, oh, this is like just came out like a week ago. I'm like, okay. It's an open protocol from Anthropic. You can think of them as like a competitor to OpenAI. They're the ones that are really spearheading this. But some of the demos are absolutely fascinating for how you can use this. You basically, instead of me, the developer of the agent, teaching my agent new skills of things that it can do to go get data real time on the fly when a prompt comes in, instead I just say, you can talk to that server, and that server, the LLM, then the orchestrator reaches out to the MCP server and says, what do you know how to do? And the MCP server says, I can do all of this. So like let's just say hypothetically, if you want to go through and expose some endpoints on Microsoft Graph to your custom declarative agent, before MCP, you would have to go through and implement each one of those different calls to call those different endpoints on Microsoft Graph. Now you can just point, if there was an MCP server for Graph, which there is, not from Microsoft, but there is that's floating around out there. A guy named I just forgot his last name. A guy named Merrill. He works for the Intra ID team at Microsoft. He created an MCP server for Microsoft Graph. Now you could connect that to your declarative agent and say, hey, I want to go like have a function that goes and gets users or gets one user or gets calendar items or whatever. You list all that out. Instead of you having to write all the code to actually implement that, you basically just you map that function to the MCP server for Graph that you've deployed and has your authentication configuration in it. And you don't have to write into the code on how to call it. It's like the MCP server says, here's how I know how to do it. And Copilot will know how to just talk directly to it without you having to go through and to define all that. It's super cool. So I was really happy to see that. Little disappointed in private preview. I'm really pushing the doors in to try and get access to that, to see that more. Another big update, this is big, is type spec. So not TypeScript, but type spec. This is a language that is relatively new. Microsoft has been using it for a while on the Azure side. And this is think of this as a domain-specific language for creating APIs. When you create a declarative agent, you need a series of JSON and YAML files. The YAML files are to describe your REST endpoints that you want to talk to, the OAD files, the Swagger files. Those can be either YAML or JSON. Traditionally, they're going to be YAML. You're like, what about you just said MCP? Well, MCP isn't going to replace that. It's going to be an additional option to it. Furthermore, you're going to have JSON files. So you'll have a JSON file that is your actions manifest that maps a function to a endpoint defined in your OAD file. Let me just, more hands here, or more space for hands. So it says like, hey, I want to go get users. That get users is going to map to, I have an open API descriptor document over here that describes this endpoint over there for get users. And what that YAML file is the OAD file. So that's the one I have to create. It's going to point to that endpoint. And what I have to do is my declarative agent needs to know that when I need to get people, what do I call? And I'm going to have the name of a function is going to map to a runtime, and it's going to map that to an operator in my OAD file that's going to point to that REST endpoint. And the Copilot orchestrator knows how to read this Swagger file, this OAD file, to understand how to go call that endpoint without me having to write any code. So that's one JSON. So that's one YAML file, the OAD file. That is another file, JSON, and then what is the other one? And then you have the manifest file for your plugins, and then you have yet another manifest file for the declarative agent that defines things like the name, the description, the description for the model, the instructions, the system instructions for the agent, the knowledge sources, or we call those capabilities, and then the agents. What type spec is, I see that comment there about a new language for an API. Won't this be restrictive? No, you don't have to do this. I'm going to give you an analogy to this in just a minute. So what you now can do is, instead of writing all of those JSON files and YAML files for your agent, which are not terribly reusable. They're going to be specific to each agent. There's some reusability to them, but JSON and YAML, there's no type safety. There's nothing stopping you from making a typo. There's no like documentation that makes it easy to use. There's no IntelliSense. There's some IntelliSense, but not much. There's no like good schema validation for YAML that exists today. So what we can do though, is we can now have we can use TypeSpec to define our declarative agent and our capabilities and our plugin manifest and that descriptor document with as a domain specific language. So we get type safety, we can build modules that are reusable, we get baked in documentation, we get IntelliSense, we get good compile time validations or build time validation warnings and errors. It's going to make our lives a lot easier. And then when we compile our TypeSpec file, it generates all those YAML and JSON files for us. If you don't want to use TypeSpec, you don't have to. You can still use JSON and YAML. Think of TypeSpec is to JSON and YAML as TypeScript is to JavaScript, or more specifically, the one that I like to use is Bicep is to Azure Resource Manager files. Azure Resource Manager is how we create things in Azure. Even when you go through the wizard in the Azure portal, you're going through a web-based wizard that is generating the JSON template to go create that Azure resource with a parameters file. A Bicep file is an easier way to write that. It's much more concise. It's got type safety, IntelliSense, validation, etc. When you compile a Bicep file, you get an ARM file, and that ARM template is what you give to Azure. Same thing with TypeSpec. You create a TypeSpec file, you compile it, JSON and YAML, that's what's given to your Copilot app. So it's just another way to build it. It does make your life a little bit easier. I've got a screenshot here you can see in my agents. That's the MCP support. So this is a screenshot in here, kind of shows you what this looks like. And you can see that these different import statements, I'm able to go through and import different modules in here, similar to how I can do this with Bicep. So the syntax is a little weird. There's like this one thing here where you see these like triple quotes here. It's a little flaky to me, but it does. I've played with this for a little while. I played with this for a little while and it's pretty good. This is how Azure creates all of their APIs. They use TypeSpec to go through and to generate the APIs and also to generate like the test files for them and stuff like that. So this is a cool little addition as well. Okay. Oh, and there was another big update. I didn't have this in my slides, but I know Brian asked about it, so I'm getting close on time. So let me just jump into this. Microsoft has also announced a couple APIs for Copilot. So we are going to have one. The big one is the retrieval API. Well, there's two big ones. There's the retrieval API, and there's another one called the Insights API. So, and there's also a chat API. So, and there are different levels of not available yet, private preview, public preview. Essentially what it is that I'm a developer and I want to get access to the same data that Copilot gets access to. I want to run the exact same query that Copilot does to get data from the semantic index. You can do that. You're going to do that using the retrieval API. You want to learn how to do that? Go watch this session right here, or this pre-recorded session, OAD 816. It's about 25 minutes long, maybe 18. It's short. It's less, I want to say it's like 15 to 18 minutes, but I might be wrong. There's also a 30-minute demo of the TypeSpec one that's also linked in here as well. It's one of those OADs for OAD type sessions, the on-demand sessions that were recorded before build. Other stuff that you got with this too, though, with these, so that one, the retrieval is going to let you get data from the semantic index. The chat API is going to allow you to essentially submit a chat message to Microsoft 365 Copilot and get the response the same way if a person was doing it. So I can now automate that. The Insights API, you know, today when you do a meeting in Microsoft Teams and that meeting, if you record the meeting with a transcript, at the end of the meeting, after a certain amount of time, you'll get an update for, what do you call it? You'll get an update for oh, Brian, I'll talk about that in just a minute. You will get, actually, Brian, right there. After the meeting, you get like the AI generated notes and the to-do items or action items. And then you also get, I think the interaction report. Today, if you wanted access to that programmatically, you would have to go get the transcript and then recreate that stuff yourself with your own prompts. Now, you don't have to. The Insights API gives you all that stuff about the meeting. And then lastly, you have interactions, which is a way for you to check and see how everybody across your tenant is like using AI and Microsoft 365 Copilot. Don't have a lot of information on that one. These APIs, especially the retrieval API, does not require a license. So what's cool about this is that now I can create a custom engine agent that does not require a Microsoft 365 license, Microsoft 365 Copilot license. And that can get data from Microsoft 365 Copilot using their orchestrator by calling the chat API or the retrieval API, using their orchestrator. But when I use these Copilot APIs, they are metered, which means that I'm going to be paying per use for these guys. So the advantage is my user doesn't need a license to do this. The flip side to it is, as the developer, I'm going to be the one incurring the cost for this, which follows along with everything else that we do with custom engine agents. Essentially saying, I don't want to do the $30 per user per month all you can eat plan for Copilot. I want to go through and pay for the resources to implement it myself. Two very different options on doing extensibility with Copilot. So that's another big update. There's a lot of other things there, stuff from Azure Foundry, stuff around Azure AI Search. They did some really cool stuff around agentic retrieval. Another big thing here that was huge for me is it's not really listed in here, but enterprise grade security. Basically, I now have the ability when I put content inside of Azure AI Search, I can include an ACL so that when I run my query on behalf of a user, I can have that query, that vector-based query, I can include I can include the current user in the query, and Azure AI Search will respond back with a security trimmed result set that only I'm allowed to see. That's huge. That's how Copilot, that's how Semantic Index works. Now, if I want to have my own vector-based search and use it with Copilot, could use this. Let's see. Yep. So Brian, so then Brian, I saw you said that one thing for the semantic index. In order for that semantic index to be created in your tenant, you do need, unless it's changed, you do need one active Microsoft 365 Copilot license. You need at least one in your tenant to get that created and get them to start indexing. So awesome. Everybody, that is everything that I wanted to cover today. And a little bit more. We're going 3 minutes over, so I want to wrap this up to be respectful of your time. I see I've already lost a few people here. I did questions as we went along the way, so we should be good. I want to thank all of you for joining me today. That's where you can find me on all the socials, just andrewconnell.social/ and then whatever the social platform is on the end of it will redirect you to my profile. And then finally, our next office hours will be on the third Tuesday in June. That will be June 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern time, New York City. All right. I'm not New York City. I'm Florida, but everybody knows where New York City is. So I guess a lot of people know where Florida is too. Doesn't matter. Hey, everybody, thank you very much. Hope this was useful for you today. If you wouldn't mind, if you don't subscribe to my channel, I'd appreciate if you subscribe to my channel. There's a way you can do it with the little icon. Where is it? Right below me, right about like there. Click on that, subscribe. Appreciate if you would like the video as well. Helps me reach more people just like you. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Everyone, I hope you all have a fantastic rest of your day, rest of your week. And if you got any questions about what I talked about here, drop a question in the chat or head over to my my article, my big recap article that I published this morning, and drop a comment at the end of that article. Awesome. Thanks a lot, everybody. Take care. I'll see you next time.